Welcome to the show,
Happy
Culture of
Monday.
Business, the Business of Culture, Monday. Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 56.
Can you believe it?
How was your weekend, buddy?
My weekend was very relaxing in a way that is almost, I don't know if I can really allow that to come out how lazy I was, but it was very relaxing.
It's good to be
How was
relaxed.
yours?
It's good to be lazy. It's good to be relaxing. It's good to be laid back. It's good to be enjoy life and all the offerings that it gives you. Would that not be a false statement?
I mean, the offering of getting more sleep than usual and just sitting on my front porch with a good book and whatever beverage. Yes, it was awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's a couple of cultures we might equate relaxation and enjoyment of life with?
Well, the French have the savoir-vivre, right?
What about us Aussie?
Oh yeah, that too. And then we have Latino and Hispanic cultures that celebrate life in all their unique ways. So yes, all of those.
Absolutely. Well, let's learn about that today because we have a great guest.
Yes.
You might just be able to tell us a little bit about that. Of course, we like to bring some business into it. We'll talk a little bit of business too because it's important in that context. Please welcome our good friend Diana Zalaquett to the broadcast.
Hola.
Yes. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Bom dia. Whatever that. G'day.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Hi.
Muy bien,
muy bien. Yes, wonderful. Now that's where we get off the Spanish train, right? That's where we jump off. I don't
get to practice the little Spanish I know and make a fool of myself. No. Okay.
Absolutely. No, we can do that. How are you, my good friend?
Doing well. Excited to see you both. Excited to be joining this amazing experience and share a little bit about this relaxation culture I'm hearing about here.
That's right. See, we are nothing short of stereotypes on this
Right,
show.
we got
this is right. We were just surprised you're on time, Diana. That's the thing. No, it's perfectly fine. I know Diana. Diana's a good friend of mine. I mean, she only just met Christian. Diana's a great friend of mine. We used to work together. I love this girl like a sister. This is and the other thing is we've gone through a little bit of Portuguese, a little bit of we went out on some French there, Chris. You got a bit of French there, Diana, too. Yeah.
I forgot the French. Okay, I'll add the French.
Got the French. And then a little story is one time I happened to be sharing an Uber with this young lady, and the driver happened to be Chinese, and of course, ni hao ma, and I'm going, what? Where do you learn Chinese? So, a person of many talents, many skills, great experience, and please tell us, first of all, where you're tuning in from. What is your current professional pursuits? And we'll just start with that. That'll set us up in terms of the business of South America, right?
Sounds great. Yeah. Well, I'm tuning in from Westport, Massachusetts, about an hour away from Boston, even though I'm not from here, but I've been living in Boston for about 13 years already. I am currently working at HubSpot. It's a software company that works with marketing, sales, and services. And the idea is to help your business grow better and scale better using software that will help you align your marketing, your sales, and your services efforts.
Great. And I guess in terms of your...
Where do I sign up? I need that right now.
Yeah, don't worry. We need that. So software is software, right? And the software language is one thing, but you have a particular, obviously because of your heritage, you have a particular expertise in the Latin American market. So, I mean, and we've had this discussion. That's why I was interested in bringing you on, because it is a different conversation, correct, right? And depending on where you're in the world in terms of the messaging you put out there and the marketing that you portray. So, are there some key things that you, when you're talking to your partners in the Latin American market, that you're either educating them on or educating maybe us gringos, you know, when it comes to that kind of, you know. Well,
yeah, sure. Make sure you can still hear me over there.
Yep, I can hear you.
Still connected?
Yep,
all
we
right,
can hear
wonderful. Awesome. So as a Latin consultant, so I work with mostly Latin American countries, and I would say there's about 70 to 80 different agencies that I work with on a day-to-day, and they're located all over the world. So they may be particularly in South America, Central America. So some of them may be in Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Argentina. Others may be in the more Central American side of the world, and they are, you know, all over Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua. So it's been really interesting to position our software specifically in the region in South America, Central America, not only because of the challenges that are accompanied by, I would say, that the tech gap that exists in South America compared to the US, and trying to kind of bridge that gap, not only from a language perspective, but also from an education perspective, and at the same time, a connectivity perspective. You know, we're in the US, we have the luxury of a very great connection, and sometimes I even have a terrible connection. So imagine the connectivity issues that we experience in South America are even larger. So there's some challenges that come with expanding into the region that have been interesting at HubSpot. But overall, yeah, it's been interesting collaborating with that culture in particular.
Do you find, Diana, that as you work for a US-based organization, that they look at the LATAM region as one monolithic market and they think it's all the same because they all speak Spanish, don't they? With the exception of 200 million Brazilians. So do you find yourself explaining the nuances of the LATAM markets, that it's not just one market, it's in fact different markets that need different approaches?
Definitely. It's been a struggle. When I first started HubSpot, I was among the first of the group of the LATAM team, which had just began. And we started with about 3 people on the team, and now our LATAM team has expanded to about 60 or more. So we now have an official office in Colombia. But when we first opened up and the LATAM, I would say, office, and even starting to expand into the LATAM world, there was definitely a lot of misinformation, as well as perhaps bias in terms of the region itself. I know that there are sometimes, I would say, the perception that we are all kind of one big happy culture that all acts the same, but in reality, it's been interesting to kind of voice the differences in the regions. Brazil, for example, is a completely different market for us than anywhere else in Central or South America. The way people get certified, the way people understand our classes and the coaching that we give is very different in Brazil versus Central America versus South America. So it's been definitely a challenge to voice. I think now there's a lot more open-mindedness going on, and a lot more of a welcoming approach to, let's take a look at every region with a different perspective.
So Colombia as the LATAM base, that's a fairly recent development, is it not?
Yeah, very recent. I'm going to say it's been about 1.5 years since we first started there.
So let's say 5 years ago, I'm saying Western in quotation marks, Western company would have considered Colombia as a site for their LATAM offices due to the well-documented political and societal struggles in the country. So is Colombia now the site for this because it's centrally located? It's easy to fly out of, I don't know, Medellin, Bogota, wherever you're located in Colombia to the different markets? Or is it because Colombians have overall very high levels of education and that's a good market to be at? What was the rationale behind that?
That's a great question. And there was actually a big, big debate on what country we were going to pick for LATAM. And we had runner-up Chile, Mexico, and Colombia. And to be completely honest, what happened was most of the LATAM employees at HubSpot, first of all, were Colombian in the first place. So there was a big push towards Colombia being that, that preferred location. But I would say after a lot of market studies, because there definitely was a team on site that went in and explored the options for opening up an office. And it ended up being interesting because cost-wise, it was a lot less expensive to open an office in Colombia than it would have been in Mexico or Chile, in terms of hiring, in terms of an actual physical office. So it actually did come down as well to budget needs. And additionally, there is a distance thing with Chile. Chile is a lot harder to get to and takes a lot longer to get to. So it was
pricey.
Definitely, yes.
Chile is expensive.
Yes, and Chile has a specific Spanish accent that is a lot, in my opinion, being Chilean as well, a lot more difficult to understand than the Colombian, more kind of standard way of speaking Spanish. I would say in order of easiest to understand, Peru comes first. I would say Colombia is maybe third in the spectrum of easy to understand Spanish accent.
Who's second?
I would say Mexico comes second. So I would say Peru, Mexico, and then Colombia. Okay. And then don't even think about the rest, because the rest have totally different crazy pronunciations where they eliminate S's and R's, and it just gets harder after that.
Let's never talk about Argentina, right?
Yeah, let's not talk about Argentina.
Chile.
Everybody's got a joke down there about the Argentinians. Oh, we love it. We love our global folks. So that's interesting. Obviously, someone on the outside is not going to know that particular part. There are linguistic differences, which are very different. What about the styles? What about some of the cultural styles in terms of building relationships, messaging, directness, indirectness? What are some of the countries that fall in those different spectrums for the LATAM area?
Yeah, for sure. I would say if we look at a spectrum of the different customers that I work with and different companies I engage with, you would notice a very big difference between the directness from somebody in Chile and Argentina versus somebody from the central region of the continent. Is actually a lot more reserved, and they're probably not as direct compared to, I'm going to say, Chile, Argentina, which are a lot more direct in their way of communicating. I'd say relationship is key for all of them. I'd say Mexico and Colombia take the lead on how relationship focused they are, even though all of the LATAM region in general has a big focus on relationship over task. And there's always a hierarchy nature of that region where, it's very, I'm going to say, challenging at first to break the ice if you aren't necessarily on top of the pyramid in terms of hierarchy whenever you're communicating with a leader or somebody that is positioned at a high level at another company.
So it's important, you would say, to specifically do the homework about the country that you're definitely going to. But also those relationships, and as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, you spent some time in China and speak a little bit of that language and had experience there. I've been struck with some of my clients where they've come between either the cultures and they've found a great deal of similarity. And in between two cultures of people on the surface would not have thought, share the concepts of deep relationships, guanxi, and also hierarchy, the hierarchical aspect of it. So we can often draw from different cultures some tips and tricks in terms of applying it to those cultures as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. It happens to me all the time. I can see a big correlation between what I learned when I lived in China to communicating with my customers in South America today. It's a big and strong connection there.
Yeah. Can I ask another question? And this is related to, I mean, your personal experience as a young professional, and you're, you know, I mean, I know you know, I've always known you've always punched well above your weight as far as your professional ability. But as a young female in some of those markets, how have you had any particular challenges in those markets?
Definitely. In the beginning, it was a big challenge because there needs to be an important, I'm going to say, focus on boundaries, especially as a woman and trying to tap into coaching in the Latin market, or even leading efforts with teams that are not even in the same location as you are. It's super important to set boundaries on, what you can accept and what you can't accept. I think one of the biggest challenges for me was drawing the line between what I can do and what I can't do when it comes to discounting, when it comes to, hey, let me grab a little bit of a higher discount, or maybe we can talk into starting class a little later instead of on time, and maybe extending our meeting from 30 minutes to 50 minutes. And those little things that in the beginning are hard to set boundaries on. But I think in the Latin culture, those boundaries tend to blur a little bit, where the culture is not very set straight on X is X and Y is Y. It's more like X is Y and Y is X, and they kind of intermingle. And so I think the key there is to really be able to understand that in the culture, boundaries may be a little bit gray in the beginning, but specifically as a woman, it's important to set them straight in the beginning so that the relationship can be a lot easier to handle down the road as the relationship with customers or the business grows.
Does it matter in your business function that when you communicate with the markets that you serve, that your customers or the people that you engage with quickly recognize that you are a sister from America del Norte, that you spend time in Estados Unidos, that you're not one of them anymore, but that you're US educated and therefore come with this, I don't know, does that bring a certain level of status with you as you enter into those conversations? Do they recognize that?
That's a very interesting question. And that is something I've noticed a lot, especially with different, I'm going to say different cultures react in different ways to that aspect of education. I will say, for example, some customers I have that are from Peru actually open up even more when I share that I lived and grew up there. And they don't really ask much about where I went to school or what I studied. It's more how much experience I have in the market. And I've actually noticed that beyond the actual educational piece, and I apologize, my dog in the background. Give me 2 seconds.
No, he's good. He's good. All right. The dog needs to be taken care of, apparently.
Dog needs to be taken care of. Well, we've got Christina here. In Argentina, the Spanish is kind of unique. It sounds like a mix of Spanish and Italian. Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
More melodic. And where they pronounce things, you never learn that in school when you study Spanish. I never studied Argentinian pronunciation, which threw me for a loop when I did business with Argentinians. But is the dog settled? Is he good? He can join us if he wants to.
Yeah, he is. he does. Wake up once in a while. So, but he's good to go. He's good to go.
So we talked about your experience in the market as a piece of relevance in the communication with your clients in Peru, is that different in markets that are economically more or in stronger exchange with the United States, like Mexico, or some Central American markets that have stronger business ties with the US than Peru or Bolivia or Chile, for instance? So is your quote unquote US-ness that shines through here and there in business, does that matter in those markets more than it would in Peruvian markets?
I would say it matters if there's a big, I'm going to say, focus on the US-ness, if they're actually, if the market that I'm talking to, or the customer that I'm talking to, is doing business with the US.
Right.
Most of the time, it doesn't really come as a relevant factor. They do. There is always a perception that, oh, because you live in the US, or because you have experience there, it might be that you have, an edge over access to certain things. But I think that's changing quickly, especially now that everything is so globalized,
Right.
and now that all of LATAM is trying to get to the same level. I think that isn't really a huge, I'm going to say, a huge thing I've noticed with my customers. They don't even really.
I'm happy to hear you say this, because I asked this question with a kind of devil's advocate perspective, because this is often the way that the US looks at Latin markets, as kind of this almost condescending, hey, aren't you a little bit codependent on what's going on up here? So if I'm hearing you correctly, that mindset has evolved over the years, that there's a much more unique self-image in those Latin markets that does not necessarily depend on the relationship they have with the United States or Europe or other markets in the world. Yeah, let's get you off of mute. There we go.
It's definitely evolved. I'm going to give you a quick example. Last week, we had an internal conversation about mobility within HubSpot. So we have a team of Latin Americans that work within the US. And essentially, at some point, it may be that somebody wants to move internally onto another team. Let's say I'm on the LATAM team, but I want to move into the US market. It's been a big piece of feedback for the company that a lot of Latin American or Hispanic people that are working in the company have had trouble moving internally. So there was a lot of thought on bias, perhaps also not having maybe the English as a first language. English as a second language could be a challenge. Additionally, there is some bias associated to, oh, you don't have experience in the US market, therefore you're not qualified to work with the US market. And that was a response that a lot of Latin American fellows were getting once they were applying to jobs internally. And this feedback was relayed to leadership, and it was made known that this was the feedback we were getting. And now it's becoming more relevant that this is not an acceptable answer, right? You can't just say, oh, you don't have experience in the region, so that doesn't make you qualified enough to move into a position that is pretty much the same role, but because you're not in the region, that doesn't mean that you're not qualified to excel in that particular role.
Nice.
There was a lot of debate around that, and I think we've come to a point where we are really leveling up, and it's no longer an obstacle or something that we'll continue to see more of.
Nice. Thanks for that. So we're seeing some questions coming in from our viewers. So Alistair is asking, the biggest issue that they have with Central and South America is that there is some, what he describes as inconsistency and quote unquote gray areas, which apparently the US is not a gray area, at least in his experience. So he says there's lots of issues currently with Argentina in particular, as well as other countries. It makes it very hard to manage. So gray areas, inconsistencies, do you experience that as well, Diana? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Argentina is a tough one for us too sometimes, mostly because of the fluctuation in currency and trying to, manage, for example, payment of bills or even charging for our software in US dollars. I think that has been our biggest challenge in the region, especially in Argentina and countries where there's so much fluctuation. And at the time, just the economic stability is not there. I think that's the biggest challenge. But I would say, other than that, it really just comes to communicating and understanding that, for example, if you're dealing with somebody in Argentina, you're going to be a lot more direct than if you're dealing with somebody that is in El Salvador or Nicaragua or Guatemala. And it's probably going to be a more US style communication for somebody in Argentina than if you're talking to somebody in Guatemala, Central America, El Salvador, even I will say Bolivia, countries where there's a lot of Andean, where the Andes cross through. You're going to see a lot more of that relationship type and indirectness versus Argentina and Chile.
Right. So that could be that gets back to our own perceptions. Of course, if we just lump a whole region into, well, we know that a lot of our other Latin American clients are a little bit, there's gray areas there, so perhaps I need to approach them with the gray area. And yet what the Argentinians are expecting is directness. Then you're communicating some gray areas, and you can almost set yourself up for, for some challenges there. So, just going in there with the intention of, okay, I know their preference in general might be that so I can be more direct. I can be more like I act in the US. Of course, great.
Absolutely,
and,
absolutely.
G'day, Al, a good Aussie mate of mine, Al, here in Chicago.
Well, if Alistair has a follow-up question to clarify what exactly he means with inconsistency in gray areas, we'll be happy to tackle it as well. Petra Zorgi dos Santos, that appears to be a Portuguese-rooted name, so she asks a very valid question here.
Yes, that's a really great one, actually.
The animosity between the Spanish-speaking world of LATAM and the Portuguese-speaking world, EI Brazil, is there still the animosity? Is it relevant to your work?
Definitely, and we see this happening all the time where it's interesting. People that are from Brazil and the Brazilian culture actually are able to better understand Spanish and even speak it before somebody from Latin America who speaks Spanish and is trying to understand Portuguese. So what I've noticed in the company is that there's a lot of Brazilians and people that are that speak Portuguese as their first language who've adopted Spanish and who are now helping within our within our whole LATAM region. I do notice that there's an assumption too that if you speak Portuguese, that you might as well also speak Spanish, and that's not the case. So I think the assumptions on, we're in a meeting with a group of, let's say, 5 Spanish speakers and 1 Portuguese speaker. It should not be assumed that that Portuguese speaker will understand Spanish, because it may be that they don't. And it's actually almost kind of like expected that if you speak Portuguese, well, then you might as well understand Spanish, but not vice versa. So
it's similar in Europe with the people in the Netherlands. So there's often the assumption that the Dutch speak German, and sometimes they do. More often than not, that don't. And the expectation is often what derails the relationship, right? And I know quite a few. I met quite a few Brazilians who would confess that they speak Portuñol and that they don't necessarily like to speak Spanish because it's not been taught as much in their school system, depending on which school they went to, and they did not see the need because the need to learn English was bigger for them than the need to speak or learn Spanish, right? So I've noticed that in my interactions with that part of the world as well. Now, Diana, when I mean, your role is in marketing, is that correct? Would that be fair to say?
It's more of a coaching role in all areas, marketing, sales, and services. We started as a company that was focused on marketing, but we've expanded into sales and services. So mainly, I do anything from business consulting to essentially helping my customers keep their customers. So it's a big complex, but I manage the channel piece of our company where we sell into Latin America, and I work with the partners that sell our software. So essentially, I help them sell our software and help my partners keep the customers that they sell our software to. It's a big channel.
I'm curious whether there are different messages that you send in those different markets. So for your specific product, can you give us an example of how one marketing story works in one market and falls flat in another one?
For sure. I've seen this happen mostly with how we allude sometimes to change. At HubSpot, and especially with our technology, change is a big factor, especially since there's still so many features rolling out, so many changes rolling out all the time. When it comes to change, sometimes we allude to the culture in order to showcase something that's changing. So, for example, in Latin America, when we announced our flywheel, right? We announced the flywheel, which is this concept of the customers in the center, and around it you have your strategy, your marketing, sales, and services. You attract, engage, and delight your customers. And we presented it. It was amazing, but then we didn't know how to explain it in Spanish. So it was a big disaster in the marketing communication side of things, because how do you say flywheel in Spanish, right? La rueda, el ciclo. So whenever I would go to conferences to showcase our new flywheel, people were just not getting, like, what is she talking about? What is this new concept that you're trying to bring into our minds? And so we had to figure out the right way of explaining the flywheel. And even sometimes it was a Spanglish thing where you say el flywheel, because we just couldn't find the right word. We found one now that isn't really a literal translation, but it's
What is it?
el ciclo inbound. Works sometimes,
El
but
ciclo
honestly,
inbound.
el ciclo. But I'd rather say el flywheel because it just makes more sense. It's like saying
And
Kleenex, right? El flywheel.
notice how the flywheel it takes on the masculine gender. El flywheel, not la flywheel.
Yeah.
El flywheel. Interesting.
100% immediately takes on, and that's a cultural thing too. Very, very. I think I was reading about how COVID was called le COVID in France, I believe, right? They called it le COVID, and not why this gender association to certain things. But LATAM for sure calls it el flywheel. At least that's
Well, I
what.
think when I think of flywheel, as somebody comes from the mechanical background that I have, I think of a car, and then we obviously might attribute cars to, even though strangely enough we often call our cars by female names, but I think the parts, there is this kind of like male thing about the car, and the muscle car especially. I don't know. I'm just throwing out maybe perhaps some suggestions, but that's fascinating. When you're talking about kind of presenting new concepts all the time, right? Things that change rapidly. Like, it's pretty in kind of a culture here where we have comfort with risk, quick change, innovation, fast-moving markets. That must be a challenge also for some of the LATAM countries that are a little bit less comfortable with risk and change, especially at a fast pace, right?
Huge. It's something very interesting when I'm presenting a new idea, even a new software feature to somebody in LATAM. And depending on where in LATAM, some take it with a lot of fear and almost like, what am I going to do? This is overwhelming. I don't know what to or how to deal with it. Versus others which are much more open to change and more excited about the new features and the new changes. And I noticed this again, Chile, Argentina, Colombia come up as the ones that embrace the change a lot quicker, and all the others are kind of in that overwhelmed feeling of, oh wow, now we have to cross this other new challenge that's coming our way. And it also falls in line with the speed of how often we change our certifications, for example. So, we have an academy where we create certifications often, and initially we didn't have a team that localized them at the same time. So it was almost like we were playing catch up, right? So LATAM was always trying to climb that ladder. We had a certification that came out, but it took us a whole year to localize it into LATAM region. And so the market wasn't even certified in the certification that the US market had already been certified for years. So it's been interesting because the shelf life of these certifications is very short too. So we're constantly changing them. And that means we needed to create a program that would localize things on the fly at the same time, and or even just create things in language and separately for every region. And that's what we're doing now, and we've seen a big change in that regard.
But that takes that mental step in the organization at I always call it at headquarters or whatever that is, in the brains of the organization, to make the deliberate decision to not act retroactively in the satellite markets, but think of all of our markets upon the inception of a new idea, product, service, widget, whatever we're creating, to have that in mind from the moment we design it, not just to adjust it and catch it up to whatever it is when we roll it out in that market. So did you notice that mind shift change during your time at the company, or had that happen before you entered?
No, it was a big disaster in the beginning where we just couldn't get it right, in the sense that our customers were complaining about not being able to get certified because they didn't understand the certifications. So, you're selling into a market where you are trying to get people to understand the methodology behind your software, but your certification is not in their language in the first place. So we were kind of assuming that people in South America all spoke English. And in a sense, yes, a lot of education is geared towards most people speaking English, but not everybody does. So it was a very big assumption that was made on, we're going to expect that everybody in Latin America speaks English and we'll be able to just take a certification in English. And so when they kind of understood that that wasn't the case, and it will never really be the case, we decided, okay, we need to hire a Latin American Academy professor who will create the content from scratch just for Latin America.
Yes.
Because it was definitely detrimental in the beginning, where even our localization wasn't proper, and we had customers complaining about, this translation makes no sense, and we really don't understand what's being said. So it was a big hit in the face when we finally got the feedback and had to act on it.
All right.
Right.
Hey, Brett, Alistair clarified, I think, his question. Will you want to elaborate this? Oh, now.
Yeah. Al will write a book about anything. We import into the US and less extent import to beef from Nicaragua, Brazil, can sometimes be an issue, but compliance and regulation. So I guess that's a big thing. Compliance and regulation, gray areas are not something you want to, especially in this culture of the US where everything is dot the I's, cross the T's. So that is
Huge.
a big, yeah.
Does that play a role in software marketing? Are you running into these market regulations things that may cripple your product in certain countries?
For sure. I'm going to say there is a lot of issues, mostly, and I'm going to say yes, compliance and regulation related things like GDPR, for example. The EU has a very strict policy with GDPR and the cookie policy and all of this. In LATAM, it's almost like, yes, it's there, but not really. And, things like sending massive spam email still happen. Even people buying lists and sending email just to send email is still happening. So you see a culture that, yes, it can be a lot more challenging to set in place these rules and regulations, especially when it comes to pricing, when it comes to legal contracts, especially if you are trying to have a collections or billing process where you have, people paying by credit card or subscription service where people are paying monthly, and it turns out that they just can't pay for their bills because of the economic situation, or because the dollar, fluctuates so much. You end up with a legal issues, and you must also understand that the legalities in South America are very different than they are in Europe and in the US. So it's really important to have a legal team, a regional legal team, local team that can help with that specific gray area, because it's not going to cut it to just have someone from the US who understands only local US laws and regulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges always, when you're crossing borders and expecting the same standards, or at least assuming the same standards and processes, because it makes common sense to us, right? Our good friend 𝙤𝙬𝙤 it talks about uncommon sense, but this is what we see as common sense may not be common sense and may be a different practice. So having somebody with some really local knowledge, but right down to the country, it's probably very important. And Petra, we have here, where there is a will, there is a way. My experience on international conferences being the only one languages and having to translate. If people are open, they understand the core issue, even Portuguese, but not what is the typical no chance, right? Yeah.
So don't expect the Brazilians to always speak Spanish with you.
That's right. Yeah. And
I remember I had a client once he worked for a French automotive supplier, and he's a high-level manager at that company, and he's from Brazil, strong automotive manufacturing market, and he was brought to the US to serve the LATAM region in his new role from the US. And the first thing he wanted to know is, can you give me Spanish lessons? Because my Spanish is so pathetic and I need to be able to communicate with my markets. And he understood more intuitively. And his American superiors were like, well, what do you need Spanish for? Don't you? And can't you? And why is that important? So exactly for the reasons that Diana just outlined.
Or as one of my clients who went to Brazil, to Brazil, an American who spoke a good amount of Spanish, but then made the mistake of using, I've used this example with some of my other Brazilian. I said, what would you say if somebody used the word propina in in Portuguese, which in Spanish is rather innocuous, but in Portuguese is a different reference in terms of just giving tips in a restaurant, right? So that can be, the two words that are similar can mean completely different things. Fantastic. This has been great. Thank you so much. This is we went a bit longer than we thought we would, and we always do because especially with
because our guests are good. I have a very male question. I hope you'll forgive me that, Diana, and maybe you will debunk the myth that is a male question. What I notice, what helps me when I want to figure out the nuances and the peculiarities of the LATAM or any region in the world, but specifically with the LATAM world, is I ask questions that lead down the soccer route, the football route. So I ask, what's your club? Or how did your team do in the last tournament?
Boy.
Is that something that you found helpful?
This is a very good one. I'm laughing because it is a very male question.
Yes.
And there is the perception that most people, especially men, will relate to small talk or starting a conversation with allusion to soccer or the football world in South America, el fútbol. And yes, you will find that it's an amazing icebreaker and only if you can confirm that the person you're talking to has some sort of affiliation or love for the sport. But I have been in situations where people have asked me what my team is and where, you know, what team I'm rooting for, and I'm like, I have no team. I don't. Nope, not my thing at all. So it really depends, and you'll probably really know if the person has a team or is an aficionado in that regard. I do think it's a great icebreaker. I don't think that it applies to everyone in South America. There are some countries that are more inclined to that than others, like Colombia and Argentina. Peru, I'm going to say are much more, Brazil, you know, are much more into the football, soccer world than Central America, for example. Chile, not that much. So it really depends. And it's also a very male kind of small talk question, for sure.
Of course it is. That's why I couched that question a little bit. All right. But thanks for clarifying that.
Of course, of course.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Diana. This has been great, as usual. I knew it would be, and very informative. And thank you to all our wonderful commenters that have offered their questions and comments in the chat. As always, if you're watching the replay, please do that and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it. I mean, come along and follow us. And we a few final comments in here from Christine in Argentina, and I always say Argentina. I don't know why that sticks in my head. Argentina and Brazil football would work for sure. Petra says icebreaker for women in Diana. It would be interesting to know. What about for women? What is it if it's not soccer for a woman counterpart in Latin?
Thanks, Petra, for that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to keep my icebreakers pretty gender neutral. So a good one that I use is I ask my customers joining for the first time, I ask them, if you had an opportunity to have dinner with an artist, band, alive or dead, who would that be? And so
nice.
It opens it up for, like, you know, any kind of gender. There's no need to kind of add the, you know, this is a male kind of question or a woman kind of question. So I find that one has worked for me.
So it's either Ricky Martin or I don't know.
Shakira, but Ricky Martin is a good one too.
Now we have to fess up, right? So who would be your favorite dinner companion, Brett? Come on.
Well, my favorite dinner companion, well, there'd be some Australian, you know, there'd be some Australian artists that I would pick that nobody would know. You know, I wouldn't be adverse to sitting down with Kylie Minogue and having a couple of beers, you know. But, you know, she's not, well, she's kind of popular around the world. She's kind of well known, but yeah, there'd be some ones that have probably passed that I would, that I'd love to bring back, you know, Michael Hutchence, you know, In Excess. Those type of artists that I'd love to kind of sit back and have a chat with that left us too soon. That's always the case, right?
So Diana, who's your favorite dinner companion then? Who do you want to sit down with?
I'm gonna say for now Shakira. Shakira's my go-to.
Yeah. Wow, that'd be cool.
Nice.
I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, thank you so much again. We'll wrap this up. Thank you again for all the comments. It's fantastic. A great discussion there, and we should do it more. If anybody has got any comments, any suggestions, anything outside of what we discussed today, please add them in the replay. And yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Un placer. Hasta luego, hasta pronto.
Hasta luego a ustedes, muchas gracias. Que estén muy bien. Chao, chao.
Ciao.
See you guys.
Bye. Bye.